I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon, and my name is Angie.
Hi, Angie.
My home group is the Happy Destiny group in Destin, Florida. I bring you greetings from our group. And I want to thank the committee for inviting Chip and I to come and have this opportunity to get to meet some wonderful people and to see some snow. You know, living at the beach, we don't have the opportunity to see snow very often. So it was really nice flying in yesterday to be able to see some snow. And we're accustomed to extreme weather as well. So when I heard that you went from 70 to 6, I could understand that. But we are so glad to be here. And thank you to Diane and Danny for hosting Chip and I. They are just a delight. If you don't know them, I hope you'll meet them before the weekend's over, because they are delightful people who know how to make people feel at home. I also want to mention Lee CD and Tapes. You know, I've known Lee for many, many years, and I've had the opportunity to watch him grow as a man and as a man in recovery. And when COVID hit, as you know, all the tapers' businesses stopped immediately. And I'm so glad that Lee's here, because a lot of the tapers have retired and they're not working anymore. So I hope you'll support Lee and his business because we need to have those tapes. If you've heard all the speakers this weekend, maybe you'll get some tapes or CDs or MP3s to be able to give them out to people that you know, so that we can continue to carry the good message of recovery. I heard somebody say one time that Al-Anon is all about relationships, and I would agree that it is. But also for me, it's been a lot about miracles, those unexplained things that happen in our lives, and it's been a lot about hope. I was raised in a military family. My father was an Army colonel, and what that meant for me was we were always moving, getting ready to move, thinking about moving, or just having arrived somewhere. And that was my life. My father was not an alcoholic. He truly was a social drinker. My mother was an alcoholic, and she was quite physically abusive to me growing up. So she and I had a pretty tumultuous relationship for a number of years. I have a brother, Glenn, who is 7 years older than I am, and Glenn has a lot of stuff going on in his life. But he's also a math and science genius. And when I was growing up, any sport that involved a ball, he excelled at it. He was the quarterback on the football team, the forward on the basketball team, the pitcher on the baseball team, the whatever you are, head of the golf league and the bowling league. And man, is he a pool shark. I've seen him win a lot of money playing pool. And then there was me, and I lived my life in books. I believe I have read every day of my life since I learned the alphabet. And when I was growing up, I used books a lot to escape. You see, I learned pretty early as a military brat that if I said hello to you, that meant I would have to say goodbye to you. And I did not like saying goodbye. So I learned not to say hello very often. So I always had my nose in a book because, you know, I could fall in love with the people in those books, the places in those books, and I never had to tell them goodbye. And so if you saw our family on the outside, you would think, boy, this family is who I want to be. They look great. But on the inside, we were really 4 islands. We were just 4 islands under this roof, and we all kind of existed on our individual island, and we came together usually at dinner every evening. That was really important to my mother, and we would come together for a meal, and then we would just live on our individual islands. Growing up, of course, there came a time when the opposite sex became quite attractive to me, and this is what he was like for me at that time. I can be in a room of 500 people. There can be one alcoholic in that room. And guess what? The heavens open up, the angelic chorus starts to sing, and the sunbeams and moonbeams shine down on that young man. And I will tell you, this room is glowing right now. I love alcoholics. I always have, I always will. My sponsor told me one time, she said, Angie, you're always going to love alcoholics. She said, honey, you just need to learn to stick with the winners. Just learn to stick with the winners. And fortunately, that was a piece of advice I took to heart. I love Al-Anons. I love alcoholics. When I meet somebody for the first time, if we click, I know. I don't have to ask them. I know they could either be in the rooms of Al-Anon or they could be in the rooms of AA. I believe our hearts speak to each other. He'd walk in and everybody would say, oh, look, he's here. Could he tell a story? He could tell a story about anything and make you believe anything. He knew how to treat a woman when he first met her. He knew how to treat her when he first dated her. He liked to live life on the edge. You know, he liked to jump out of airplanes or drive race cars real fast or drive motorcycles real fast. There was something about that living life on the edge kind of guy. Woo, it just called out to me. He also, in my experience, had either been physically or sexually or emotionally abused growing up. He either physically or sexually or emotionally abused the women that he was involved with. He didn't know how to express any feelings at all. He did express one, anger, very inappropriately. He had no idea how to handle conflict. And I realized after a while that he was me. He was me. You see, I have much more in common with alcoholics than I do differences. I understand the four horsemen. I understand selfishness and self-centeredness and fear and resentment and anger. I understand those things. In addition, I would lie when it would be just as easy to tell the truth. Sometimes I would lie and I wouldn't even understand why I was lying. I believed if you would let me control the world and everybody in it, we all would be so much better off. I could manipulate with the best of them. I didn't really like normal. That was kind of boring to me. I liked a little drama and I liked a little chaos. And if there wasn't drama and chaos going on, I knew how to create it. And I could create it so well that you would end up apologizing to me because you had started it. I could crucify or castrate you with the words that would come out of my mouth. I could talk you into a corner and hold you there, and the only way you could get out would be to push or shove me, and then could I make you feel guilty about that? Now, I'm not happy that that's the woman that I was and that that's the woman that I am. But I am happy that I work a transformative program. And if I work that program the way I've been instructed to do it, I don't have to be that woman today. I can be a woman of grace and dignity standing before you proud of who I am. Now, I will tell you that woman still steps forward on occasion. And then I have to make amends. I have to do an inventory. I have to do what I need to do to make things right. I hear people say sometimes who their qualifier is in Al-Anon. Well, I will tell you, there are a lot of people that satisfy the membership requirement for Al-Anon for me. But I am my qualifier because I have a set of behaviors and a set of patterns of behavior and ways of acting and things that I do that more than qualify me for this program. And that's why I continue to come. And that's why I love this program. So his wounded heart would call out to my tortured soul, and we would join hands together, and we would walk off into the sunset to live happily ever after. And unfortunately for me, it just never worked. It just didn't work. Short-term relationships, short-term marriages, I just couldn't get it right. I just couldn't. Fortunately, in 1978, I was living in a small town in South Alabama. I know you can't tell I've ever lived in the South. And I was in a musical, and the name of the musical was Carousel, and I went to that musical and met a young man that the sunbeams and moonbeams shone down on, and he took me to my first Al-Anon meeting. And when I walked it was in a church, and when I walked in the foyer that night, there was a lady standing in the doorway that I can still see today as well as I saw her that night in 1978. Her name was Miss Ina. It was 1978, so she had brown hair, and it was up on this big bouffant thing with curls everywhere. She had on a royal blue silk dress that belted around the waist. She had on black patent leather high-heel shoes. She had her hose on. She had her jewelry on. She had a pair of glasses on with a chain around her neck. And she held out her hand, and she said, "Honey, you come with me." And that was my first Al-Anon meeting. Now, I can't tell you one thing that was said that night. Sometimes great events happen in our lives, but we don't realize at the time that they're a great event. But I can tell you, she gave me this One Day at a Time book that night, and I knew I was home. I knew I was home. I don't know how or why, but I did. And it was really strange for me because, you see, at that time, I didn't believe I knew any alcoholics. Now, please understand, I had been married to several by now. All my great uncles were alcoholic. My favorite uncles were alcoholic. My favorite aunt was an alcoholic. My mother was an alcoholic. But you see, to me, they were my uncles. It was my aunt, but it was my mom. It was ex-husbands. I didn't associate their behaviors with the disease of alcoholism at that time. And I don't know how it was where you were in 1978, but where I lived in 1978, Al-Anon was made up of women who were married to the men that were in the AA room that met right next door at the very same time the Al-Anon meeting was meeting. And you see, that's not who I was. So while I identified strongly with the message, I really didn't identify so much with the messengers. I am so glad today that Al-Anon is made up of all kinds of people from all walks of life and all sorts of everything. So for about 12 years, I was in and out of Al-Anon. I'd come back to Al-Anon after I'd messed up another relationship, and I'd learn a little bit more, and I'd run out there and be dangerous, and then I'd come back. But finally, June 15th, 1990, I said, "Angie, you are so blessed. You are so blessed. You have found Al-Anon." Most people never find Al-Anon. Lois Wilson, the co-founder of Al-Anon, was quite concerned about that. She even wrote about that some. She said, people will read in the newspaper about somebody being arrested for drinking or somebody being in an alcohol-related accident. But how are they going to hear the good news of recovery? How are they going to hear the good news of recovery? She said, we are not a secret society. I worry about that too sometimes. How are people going to hear about the good news of recovery? Well, I had heard it. And the second thing was I could choose to stay. Most people that do find us don't stay. They don't stay. If this room was full of everybody I've seen in Al-Anon over 31 years, it would be overflowing by far. Most people don't stay. But I said, Angie, you can choose to stay. You can choose to accept the miracles that God wants you to have and live this way of life. And I did. And since June 15th, 1990, I've been a very active and continuing member of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon. I've been so grateful and blessed, and have had everything in my life change. Everything in my life change. So, there I was. May 18th, 1991, I woke up that morning and I knew it was time to go see my daughter. I have a precious daughter named Amanda who was the absolute best thing that came out of my first marriage, and she was a freshman at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, way up in the northern part of our state, and I had not heard from her in 3 months, and that was very unusual because we were pretty close and we kept in contact. I'd been back in Al-Anon about a year now, and I was really trying the best I could to do with what I had at the time to work this program the best I knew how. So I was waiting on God to let me know what to do about Amanda. And I knew that morning it was time to go to Tuscaloosa. I called my two best friends, and we took off to Tuscaloosa, and we got to where Amanda lived, and there was mail all over the ground, and we picked it up and put it in the car. And my friend said, what are we going to do here? And I said, I don't know. God's going to let us know what to do. And there are times in my life, if I'm doing what I need to do, if I'm being as spiritually fit as I can, if I'm being of service to God and my fellows, if I'm working this program to the best of my ability, God will just do for me what I cannot do for myself. And that whole day was kind of that day. Went to an apartment, knocked on the door, nobody answered. I said, I'm going to go get the apartment manager to come open up the apartment. And I was walking downstairs with one friend, Beretta, and Melody said, I'll stay here. And she called out and she said, Angie, she's here. And I turned around and walked back upstairs, and my daughter Amanda was standing in the doorway, and I went up to her and I hugged her. And I said, Amanda, I love you, and it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We walked inside, sat down, talked for a few minutes. I said, Amanda, I want you to know that I'm here today to make you an offer. And in my mind I was thinking, I wonder what the offer's going to be. And I said, I know something's wrong. I don't know what it is. I don't know what's happening in your life, but I know something's wrong. And I'm here today to do whatever I have to do, whatever I need to do to help you. And inside I'm going, oh, this sounds good. I said, I'm willing to take you where I need to take you, pay whatever I need to pay, do whatever I need to do, Amanda, to help you. And then I said, but the offer's only good for today. And inside I was just screaming, don't do this. I said, if you accept the offer, great. I'm going to do exactly what I said. If you don't, that's okay too. We'll go have lunch. We'll spend the day together. We'll visit. I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to be your mother. But Amanda, I won't ever make you this offer again. And then I stood up and I said, you have an hour to make up your mind. And I was just screaming inside my head, do not do this. Don't just give her an hour. Don't just give her a day. Left, came back. When I came back, I've been crying because I knew she wouldn't accept the offer. And we talked for a minute or two, and she said, Mama, I accept your offer. And my mind was a total blank. But a name came to me of a therapist in Fairhope, Alabama, way down southwest Alabama. And I called information. For those of you that don't know, information was a lady we used to be able to call. Her number was 411. And if you had given her permission, she would give out your number. And so I called information, and she gave me the lady's number, and I called. And the lady answered the phone. She was a therapist. She answered the phone. I told her who I was, a little bit about what was going on. By this time, my daughter told me she had written a few bad checks. So I told the therapist that. We talked a little, and she said, well, maybe she's got a mental illness. And I said, maybe she does, because I knew a little bit about mental illness. And I thought, if she's got a mental illness, that's okay. We'll get her some good therapy, maybe get her some medication for a while, and she'll be okay. So the therapist said, I'll call you back. She did. And as a result of that, at 9 o'clock the next morning, we were at Providence Hospital in Mobile, Alabama, way down southwest Alabama. And Amanda was admitted to a unit there. At that time at the hospital, they had one floor of the hospital, and half of the floor was for persons with mental illness, and half of the floor was for persons that had alcohol and drug issues. And I want to stop here and say, anybody I talk about in my story in any significant way has given their approval for me to do that. So Amanda was admitted onto the half of the floor for persons with problems with mental illness. I met her psychiatrist. His name was Dr. Thomas. He has since gone on to that great meeting in the sky. And Dr. Thomas said, "What do you think's wrong with your daughter?" I said, "I don't know. She's written a few bad checks." He said, "Maybe she's got a mental illness." So I left her there. And I drove home. I was living in Dothan, Alabama, 4 hours on the other side of Alabama on the southeastern corner. And Amanda stayed there for 2 months. And every weekend I would go see her. And every weekend she would tell me serious and dramatic things that had happened in her life. Serious and dramatic things that I didn't know anything about. But for me, the most serious and the most dramatic was the day that she told me she was an alcoholic. You see, I had been running from the disease of alcoholism and to the disease of alcoholism all of my life. And I knew I had a decision to make that day. Was I going to run from my daughter, or was I going to run to her? When I got home that day, I fell on my knees and I took step one in a way I had never taken it before. I knew my life was unmanageable. I could see the unmanageability all around me. But I did not want to admit I was powerless. I don't know what there was about that illusion of power that I just clung to, but I didn't want to give it up. But that day I did. I gave it up and I went to my next Al-Anon meeting and I asked Debbie to be my sponsor, and we dove into the steps in a way I never had before. Step 2 was easy for me. I have known all of my life that there is something greater than me in the universe. I have always known that. So you see, I try to just live my life kind of under the radar of that something that I call God. Just kind of right out of His view, right out of His sight. Because I believed if He ever truly saw me, if He ever saw me, He would not want someone like me that had done the things that I had done to live on this beautiful earth that He had created. So I tried to just live out of His sight. So you can imagine when I got to step 3, that was a little bit harder. Because now I'm asked to turn my will and my life over to the care of this God that I've been hiding from. But I figured out a way to do that. I said, I will do that. I will turn my life and will over to the care of God one day. I'm going to do that one day. When I worked the steps, I worked them with Debbie the way she had worked them with her sponsor. And I had a study guide and had a whole bunch of stuff to read, and 12 questions to answer for each step. So I met at the clubhouse and we did step 3 and answered all those questions. And I never told her I was saved. One day. You know, I'm so grateful for one arm of my Al-Anon lineage because it goes like this. It goes from Lois Wilson to Arbutus in Texas, from Arbutus in Texas to Lou Bell in Arkansas, from Lou Bell in Arkansas to Mary Pearl in North Little Rock, Arkansas, from Mary Pearl to Debbie in Delville, Alabama, and from Debbie to me. And you know, when Arbutus was spreading the good news of Al-Anon in Texas, all she had to use in those days was the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 and 12. Thank you, Alcoholics Anonymous, for giving us, and I've been told some 300 other anonymous type groups, permission to use that literature. So that's all Arbutus had. So that's what she used. So that's been passed down in my lineage. And it's the wonderful, wonderful Al-Anon literature that we have today has been published and printed. We have used every bit of that literature. But we've also always used the Big Book and 12 and 12. So when I finished step 3, Debbie said, when you get up in the morning, you'll say the 3rd step prayer. And you'll say it every day the rest of your life. And when we got to step 7, she added that on as well. So when I got up the next morning, I said the 3rd step prayer. And as you know, it starts off, God, I offer myself to Thee. And it wasn't one day. It wasn't one day. It was right now. And I knew God was seeing me. For a long time when I said that prayer, I would just sob. Because I truly believed He was just going to kill me. I really did. You see, that's how much pain I was in when I came to Al-Anon. I would have done whatever Debbie told me to do. I remember that today as I sponsor people. I would have done whatever she said. But there came a time I stopped crying when I said that prayer. Although I still get a little misty sometimes. And then I started singing it. And now a lot of days I sing those prayers. And at the end I throw up my hands and I say, God, what mission have you got for me today? Let's get on with it. Let's get on with it. So that was my step 3. When I finished step 3, Debbie handed me a packet. She said, this is your 4-step inventory. And it was 30 pages, front and back, single space, of nothing but question after question after question about my life. My life when I was little, when I was middle school, when I was a teen, everything about my life. Well, as soon as I got that packet, I went and sat down. I always met with Debbie before a meeting, so I got to my spot and I was going through those pages. And I was already bargaining with God. Because you see, there was something I knew I didn't have to tell God. I think a lot of us may have a thing or two like that. I knew I didn't have to tell him. I had always rationalized and justified why I didn't have to talk about it, why I didn't have to tell God or anybody else. So I'm going through there and I'm telling God, God, I know I'm not supposed to tell this. I know I'm not supposed to. But just in case I am, it's going to be in here. And it's going to say exactly, God, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's not going to say da-dee-da-dee-dee or da-da-da-da-da. It's going to say the exact words, God, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And if it says those exact words, I'm not going to tell it. Well, sure enough, about 3/4 of the way through that packet, about halfway down that page, there it was. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I said, oh, God, I'm going to have to tell her. I'm going to have to tell her. The day I did step 5, I met Debbie at the clubhouse, and I made sure I got there before she did, and I watched her drive up, and I watched her get out of the car, and I watched her come up to me, because I knew when we got to that question, my relationship with her was going to change. We walked inside, sat down, she would ask the question, I would answer the questions. We got to that question, she asked it, I answered it. I started crying. She came over and stood behind me, and she just wrapped her arms around me. And I felt something on top of my head, and it was her tears. And the instant I felt her tears on my head, the shame and guilt that I felt for what I had done was gone. It was just gone. Now, I still felt responsible, and I need to feel responsible for every action and behavior of my life. But the shame and the guilt were just killing me, and it was gone. Step 6 and 7, I did the way I think a lot of us do when we first work the steps. I did each step. I read everything I was supposed to read. I met Debbie at the clubhouse for each one. I did those 12 questions for each one. Then I went somewhere and kind of waited a while, and then I just waited a while longer and waited for God to fix me. Well, I just don't have that kind of God. He expects me to do my part. He expects me to do my part. And if I do my part, He meets me every single time. There have been 3 books over the years that have helped me understand Step 6 and 7 in a way that nothing else has. And those 3 books are Drop the Rock, The Ripple Effect, and Steps and Stories by Sandy Beach. Those 3 books have just brought to life Steps 6 and 7. As I said, my daughter stayed in the hospital for 2 months. The day I went to pick her up, I had a contract for her to look at it. I had written the contract myself. You see, I come from a long line of martyrs. You know. Woe is me. I can't believe you're doing this to me after all I've done for you. Look at what all I'm doing for you, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't want to be that kind of person anymore. So that's why I wrote the contract. I wanted things to be even Steven where I couldn't martyr Amanda. So she looked at the contract, and it said things like, I agreed to buy groceries. She agreed to cook 3 nights a week. I agreed she could use my car once in a while because she didn't have one then. She agreed to keep my car clean to detail. I agreed she could stay with me for a while. She agreed to pay me $100 a month rent. I agreed to go to Al-Anon. She'd go to AA. I agreed not to have men spend the night in our home. She agreed not to bring anybody over to spend the night in our home that was a man. And on and on and on. Now, I will tell you also, by this time, I had been through all that mail that was outside my daughter's apartment. And she was facing at least 15 years at Tutwiler Prison for Women in Alabama because of the amount of bad checks that she had written. And I had paid all that off. And the contract said she had 10 years to pay me back, or she would go to Tutwiler Prison for Women in Alabama. Now, if Amanda was here today, she would tell you she read that contract and she thought, prison or mama? Prison or mama? But she did sign the contract. She paid that money back to me in 8 years. She did sign the contract. And we went home to learn how to be a family in recovery. And I'll share a quick couple of things about that. Amanda had been living with me several months, and I came home one day. And if any of you know Amanda, she's very vivacious and outgoing, So I came home one day and she said, Mama, I've been doing everything you want me to do. I'm going to my meetings. I got a sponsor. I'm working the steps. I'm busy. I got 6 part-time jobs. I'm working. I'm cooking. I'm cleaning your car. Mama, I'm doing all this stuff. But I just don't think I'm going to have the rent money tomorrow. But I'm doing everything else you want me to do, Mama, and I'm working hard, and I've got it going on. And I said, Amanda, you are absolutely right. You are doing everything that I've asked you to do and more. And I hope you are so proud of yourself because you are living such an example in life of recovery. And it's okay if you don't have the rent money when I get home tomorrow. Because you see, I went and talked to the Salvation Army before you came to live with me. And they told me that anytime I needed to, I could drop you off, and they would give you 2 hots and a cot. So when I get home tomorrow, if the rent money's not on the table, that's okay. I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to be your mother. We'll still do things together. But I'm going to take you to the Salvation Army and drop you off. Then you will never live with me again. Because you will have broke the contract. And anything you want, you better take. Because whatever you leave here is going to be mine. Well, you can imagine her eyes were big as dinner plates, And I went in the bathroom and got in the shower, my favorite place to cry. And I just boo-hooed. Because I knew I could do that. I knew I could. You see, there had been some times in Amanda's life that I would say things to her that I wouldn't say to the checkout clerk at the grocery store. There had been some times in Amanda's life that I would use a tone of voice with her that I wouldn't use with the teller at the bank. There had been some times in Amanda's life that I would roll my eyes or shrug my shoulders or make other kind of gestures that I wouldn't do to a stranger that I would be sitting next to on a plane. And I really thought that day that those times were probably pretty much over, because I could finally see my daughter as a person deserving of respect and dignity. Deserving of respect and dignity. And if any of us in this room had a contract together and one of us broke it, there would be consequences for that. That is just the way the world works. And Amanda was deserving of that same respect and dignity as anybody else would be. I got home the next day, the rent money was on the table, and it was there every month until she moved out. Another thing I learned that I still learn today goes like this. If my name is not in the sentence, it is none of my business. And this is how that works. Sometimes I would say something to Debbie like, boy, I wonder if Amanda's going to her meetings. And Debbie would say, Angie, your name is not in that sentence. So then I would say, boy, I wonder if Amanda, Angie's daughter, is going to her meetings. Debbie would say, you cannot do that. Your name is not in that sentence. Here's some other sentences that don't have my name. Is Amanda working the steps? Does Amanda have a sponsor? Is Amanda being a good home group member? And as the years have gone on, is Amanda being a loving wife? Is Amanda being a great mom to those 2 grandchildren of mine? Is Amanda being an upstanding citizen? Is Amanda being a woman of dignity and grace and speaking her truth and kindness and love? And on and on and on. My name is in none of those sentences. But here are some sentences that do have my name. Is Angie going to her meetings? Does Angie have a sponsor? Is Angie being a good home group member? Is Angie being a loving wife? Is Angie being an awesome grandmother? Is Angie being an upstanding citizen? Is Angie being a woman of dignity and grace and speaking her truth and kindness and love, and on and on? I learned my name was in enough sentences that I really didn't have much time left over to worry about those sentences that didn't have my name. Amanda celebrated 30 years in AA last year, and she has a wonderful program. She has a precious, precious husband who we absolutely adore, have 2 beautiful grandchildren, and we love each other. Amanda and I love each other. We're still mother and daughter. We're still family. We love each other. We love each other. And I'm so grateful to the programs of Al-Anon and AA for that. My mother never did get in recovery. The last few years of her life, she had COPD and emphysema such that she could no longer drive to go buy the alcohol. So she did not drink, but she was not in recovery. And for most of that 2-year period of time, she stayed with me 3 weeks out of the month, and then with my daughter a week, sometimes 2 weeks out of the month, because I would have to go out of town. And then 3 weekends out of 4, I would take her to her home so she could be at her home on the weekend. I never could have done that without the program of Al-Anon and without Open AA. I never could have done that. But you see, when I got in Al-Anon, my sponsor said, Angie, you have the family disease of alcoholism. You better learn everything you can about this disease. And you know, us Al-Anons, we usually have an annual convention once a year. We might have a district picnic and a workshop, and that's it. But y'all AAs, you're doing stuff all the time. And we got in the car and we went. We went. I got to learn about the family disease, and I got to learn about recovery. I learned how to be a loving mother, how to be a kind wife, how to be a kind sister. I learned all those things watching people just like you in the rooms of recovery. We would rent a lake house, all of us Al-Anons and AAs at the clubhouse, and we'd all go up there. There might be 35 or 40 of us. You wouldn't know who was AA or who was Al-Anon. We'd have a big book weekend or a 12 and 12 weekend or a promise weekend or whatever kind of weekend. And I got to see how you lived. I got to hear your stories at speaker meetings. I got to hear what you did when you handled conflict. I got to see how you loved each other. I learned that I could love a man and him not expect to have sex with me. I learned that a man could love me and not expect me to have sex with him. I learned that a dad could love me and a mom could love me without hitting me. I learned everything about family in recovery. And I believe that's what we're supposed to do. And I don't believe we learn it in just a meeting 1 hour a week. And I learned it from the big book. I am so grateful to the World Service Office of Al-Anon because they told me I can read anything I want to. And you know, as a big reader, that's real important to me. They told me I can read anything I want to. I can study any literature I want to. I can go to any kind of weekend I want to or any kind of workshop, or I can do studies in my home. I can do whatever I want to do. But for my regular Al-Anon meeting once a week, they asked that I confine most of my comments to conference-approved literature. And I do that. I do that, and I believe in that. Because I know some people that come to my meeting, that 1 hour a week is the only Al-Anon they're going to get. And I want them to get the good Al-Anon that saved me. So thank you, Al-Anon, for that permission. So, one day my mother was sitting on the couch and she said, Angie, I know you talk about me when you speak. And I said, no, ma'am, I don't. She said, I know you do. And at that time, I really didn't. I said, no, ma'am, I don't. And then she said, I know you talk about when I used to beat you. And you know my breath just went out of my body because we had never talked about that and I did not want to talk about that. And I said, no, ma'am, I don't talk about that. And she said, I know you do. And I said, no. And then she said, I'm thinking about later, I think she was trying to make amends to me. Then she said, well, you know, I didn't beat you every day. And you know, for an untreated Al-Anon, I believe that was probably an amends. And I said, no, ma'am, you didn't beat me every day, but you beat me many days. And one day was one day too many. And then I looked at my mother, and what happened to me was what I heard a speaker say one time happened to her. I believe I truly was able to see my mother the best I could with my human eyes that day, the way God probably saw my mother. And I saw this little 82-year-old shriveled up woman that was always 60 feet tall to me. This little old shriveled up tiny woman sitting on the couch with her pajamas on in the middle of the day and the oxygen tubes in her nose and her hair a little bit disheveled and all hunched over and scared and fearful and lonely, had lived most of her life behind a 10-foot concrete wall that nothing could get out and nothing could get in. A woman who could be whatever she needed to be. She was a marvelous officer's wife. She kept an immaculate home. She fed us well. She fed us well. And she beat me. And now when I'm done out in front of her, I said, and Mother, I have forgiven you for that. And I said, I am so sorry I haven't told you that. I said, remember that day I came to see you and I talked about things that I had done to you and how I wanted to try to set that right? And she said, yeah. I said, I had already forgiven you that day. Steps 8 and 9. You see, when I got to step 8 and made my list, Debbie said, we've got some work to do here. She said, the people on here, yes, you have hurt. But a number of these people have also hurt you. And she said, Angie, you've got to be able to forgive these people so that when you go to make your amends, you can go with a pure heart of nothing but love. Nothing but love. So that no matter what happens or what they say, you will know that you have made a true loving amends. And I had worked on forgiving my mother for a while before I ever went to her. And I told her, I said, I had already forgiven you that day, and I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. And I love you. And we hugged each other, and we cried together. And, you know, my mother was 82, and I think it was the second time in my life I ever saw her cry. Thank you, Al-Anon. Thank you, Open AA, for giving me a relationship with my mother I never would have had if it weren't for these rooms. In 2006, I was doing a 10-step inventory, and I realized I had never turned over the part of my life that has to do with male-female relationships to God. I had never given that to God. Now, I don't know why, because by now the wreckage is up to my chin. But I'm still thinking that I can do it better than God. But that day, I surrendered. That day, I surrendered. I said, God, I cannot do this. I don't know how to do this. I've never known how to do this. I'm done. I'm done. I'm not going to look for men anymore. I had friends at this time. Let's tell you how old I am. All these websites had just come out. They've said, go on lovelove.net and kisskiss.com and there's men on there and all this stuff, you know. And I told God, I said, I'm not doing any of that. I'm not doing any of that. I'm going to turn down dates. I'm just going to learn how to be a happy, joyous, and free woman in recovery. I'm going to get in therapy. I'm going to go through all this wreckage. That's what I'm going to do. And I said, and I'm going to change my spiritual life. You see, by this time, to me, God is a big kahuna in the sky. He's this big kahuna. And I wanted to be a big kahuna in the sky. But I also wanted him to be my best friend down here on earth, and he wasn't. I wanted him to be right next to me when I was driving in the car, when I was walking down the street. I wanted to be able to talk to him just like I'm talking right now. And I didn't have that kind of God. I had a big kahuna in the sky, which I wanted, but I wanted more. So I changed my spiritual life, and I changed up some things about that. And I started on a journey that took 8 years. Now, I didn't know it was going to be 8 years when I started. I didn't know I was going to date for 8 years. But you know, that's what it was. This cute girl came up to me one time. She was probably 23, 24. She said, oh my God, Miss Angie, are you telling me I can't date for 8 years? I said, no, honey, I'm not telling you. I said, I don't know how much wreckage you've got. I'm not telling you how long it's going to take. I said, I had a lot of wreckage. But I will say this, don't settle. Don't settle. We know when we're settling. We hear that still soft voice. We feel that little in our gut. We know. Don't settle. I can't tell you how many times I settle about men, about jobs, about all kind of stuff. And I realized recently that I don't know how many times I settled right before God was ready to give me a miracle. Right before He was going to give me a miracle. But I settled. And then I realized, how many miracles have I kept somebody else from getting because I would interfere or enable or control right before God was going to do something so impactful and miraculous in their life. And I made a commitment that day. I hope I never interfere in somebody else's miracle for the rest of my life. I hope I never do that. Don't settle. So, I worked hard. I went to therapy. I changed my spiritual life. I did a whole bunch of stuff. And 8 years later, on March the 8th, 2014, I was going to the Flint River Roundup, and I was going to host Bo T, and I was leaving my house, and I was just talking away to God. I'm just talking to Him because now He's my best friend, and I can talk to Him about whatever I want to talk to. And at the end of my conversation with Him, I said, God, I just want you to know that I've done everything You've wanted me to do, and I'm ready. And I was like, whoa. And that really did impact me. I got to Flint River, and I was rooming with a friend of mine named Jean, and when I walked in the door, she knew something had happened. She said, Angie, what's wrong? So I told her. And I said, Jean, I told God, I just want you to know I've done everything You wanted me to do, and I'm ready. And then I said, because I have this kind of God today, I said, let's see how long it takes God. Well, less than 24 hours later, my husband Chip, he'll be your speaker in the morning, he and I had our picture made on the stage at the Flint River Roundup, and a 14-year friendship started to change. I had told God, if there's ever anybody You want in my life, You're going to have to put them in front of my face and keep them there because I'm not going to be looking for them. And I reckon 14 years was long enough because our friendship started to change, and 6 months later we were married. And I have had my first ever 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th wedding anniversaries. We're aiming for 50, and then we're going to go on to the next 50. And marriage is pretty good. It is pretty good. I love Chip. I adore Chip. And he loves me. He had 26 years in AA when we got married, and I had 24 in Al-Anon. My sponsor said, well, this marriage is starting off with 50 years. I think it might have a chance. So that brings me to step 12. I have had a spiritual awakening. Not because I go to meetings, not because I have a sponsor, not because I set up chairs at my home group, not because I speak once in a while. Those things are important to me, but I have had a spiritual awakening because I have worked the steps with a sponsor who has worked the steps. So now what do I do with this spiritual awakening? How do I practice these principles in all my affairs? I can practice them really good in my 1 hour Al-Anon meeting. How do I practice them the other 23? I'm going to tell a few quick stories and I'll be done. In 2014, Chip and I, before we got married, were at the Gulf Coast Jubilee. And it was a AA Roundup with Al-Anon participation. We were standing in the food line. And it was Chip and me and a young man in front of me named John. And John is 44 now, so he was 2014, however many years less that is. And John is a dear friend of my daughter. Very dear friend. They've been close for many years. And so John and I were talking. And John's in AA, and he'd been in AA, I think about 6 years at that time. And so we were talking, and I said, how you going? And John said, Angie, I'm really having a tough time. And I said, you are? He said, yeah. And I said, why? He said, well, I want to make amends to my parents. And John's dad had died when he was 9, and his mom had died when he was 28. And he said, I'm really struggling with how to make amends to them and what to do. Now, I have something that I usually say when somebody tells me something like that about ways you can make amends to people who have passed on. But I felt that little nudge. And I felt that little tug. And so this is what I said that day. I said, well, John, we're standing right here. And he looked at me and he got real teary. And he looked at Chip. And he said, oh my God, would y'all be my parents? And I looked at Chip and he looked at me and we said, sure. And so we're John's parents. And we have been on a journey with John that has been miraculous. It has just been miraculous. John lives in Destin now where we do. He got a fabulous job in Destin, and so he moved down there, and he stayed with us for, I think, about 4 months before he got his own place. And we were talking one day, and he said, Angie, he said, my parents loved me. They loved me so good, but they didn't know all of me. And he said, you and Chip know all of me. And you love me so good. And you know, I knew in that instant why I had said to John what I did that night in 2014. Before he moved out, he came in the door one day, and of course I would have dinner every night. We'd all sit down, just like my mom used to do us. And John came in and he said, this feels so good. He said, it's been many years since I was able to come home to family. And I said, yeah, it's been many years since we've had some family come home, because Amanda had been away from home for a long time. And Amanda loves John, and John loves Amanda, and we love all of them, and we have a family that I never would have had without Al-Anon and Open AA. Never. About 5.5 years ago, I was saying things on social media that I did not need to be saying. I was arguing. I was being argumentative and disrespectful. I was not being a woman of grace and dignity. It was not pretty. It was not pretty. And my sponsor is not on social media, so she did not know what I was doing. So I called her one day and I said, my sponsor today is Mary Beth. I said, Mary Beth, I have a confession to make. And I told her what I've been doing. She said, oh my gosh, Angie. I said, I know. She said, we've got some work to do on causes and conditions. I said, okay. Well, finding the cause, finding what I had to do about it was pretty easy. I had to go on social media and make amends, which I did. I went on Social Media World and I said, I want to set some things right. I've been saying things and doing things that a woman of grace and dignity does not need to be saying and doing on social media. And I want to make it right. Here's all my contact information. If I have said or done anything that has offended you in any way, please contact me, and I'm willing to do whatever I need to do to make that right. And I make a commitment today that I'm going to do the best I can to be an example of grace and dignity and love and truth and kindness from here on. And I have done my best to do that. A few years ago, I was watching the news one night, and the newscaster was talking about all these people doing all these things and all these ways and all these places, and I was just offended and shocked and all this stuff, But then I got more than offended and shocked when this thought struck me. Angie, God loves every one of the people, my God, loves every one of the people that newscaster is talking about just as much as he loves you. Did I get mad at God? I was so angry at God. For weeks I was angry at God. I railed at God. I fussed at God. I argued with God. I did everything with God. How dare he love those people as much as he loved me? See, I don't have any ego at all, do I? How dare he care about those people the way he cared about me? How dare he? How dare he? How dare he? And I talked to my sponsor and I inventoried and I did all this stuff, And finally I got to a crossroads. And I had to make a decision. And the decision was this. Well, I really had to make two. The first one was, did I want a big, all-encompassing God of love? Or did I want a little tiny God that looked like me and talked like me and acted like me and voted like me and believed like me? Which did I want? A big, all-encompassing God of love or a little tiny God? Well, I will tell you, it took me a while to make that decision because I knew what it was going to mean when I did. So it was another couple of weeks. But I finally did decide, in really a state of brokenness, I finally did decide that I wanted that big, all-encompassing God of love. And I knew what that meant for me. What it meant was that God expected me, to the best of my human ability, to love every one of the people that newscaster was talking about, just as much as God loved me. And that's a journey that I've been on since that day. Sometimes it means trying to find one grain of sand in common with someone. And if you live at the beach or you live around the beach, you know how hard it would be to find one particular grain of sand. But I believe that's the mission I've been given. You see, I believe when I got in recovery, that meant that I was held to a higher standard. And what that means for me is, I was thinking the other day, what is the program of attraction? What is it? Because most people don't come to a meeting. What is the program of attraction? And I've decided, for me, the program of attraction is me. And it's you. And it's each of us. So what that means is, when I go through the Starbucks line, if that person that waits on me all the time walks into my Al-Anon meeting when I get home on Tuesday, what is that person going to think about Al-Anon when she sees my face? If the person that waits on me most of the time at the grocery store comes to an Al-Anon meeting, what are they going to think when they see me? And then if I hold myself out as a sponsor, whoa, that's a whole other deal. Because then I really have to be human. Then I really have to share my humanness and acknowledge when I mess up and screw up and fess up and all of that stuff. What a powerful journey we are on. It is so much more than reading literature and going to meetings. If we want it to be, and if we want what it has to offer. You know, while we've been meeting here this weekend, they've been Zooming everywhere, thank goodness. Many Zoom meetings, and there's face-to-face meetings, and there's even conferences going on. And they're all doing what we're doing here. They're all sharing their language of the heart with each other. I'm Angie Baldwin, and I thank you so much for letting me share my language of the heart with you. Thanks.